and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. One of the biggest things that everybody expected Russia to do in an offensive was a crippling cyber attack on Ukraine. And that is something that the world perceives as the Russian strong point. With the allegations of Russia actually meddling online with the US election, creating narratives, and of course, the cyber attacks that originate from Russia towards various, Western countries has shown the capability that the Russians actually have. I have here Lieutenant General Dr. R.S. Panwar, who's going to take us through what kind of cyber activity did he notice during this operation. What are the capabilities, and what is the changes that will come out after this particular conflict? Thank you, sir, for joining me. This is a ongoing conflict, so obviously a lot will be in it's happening even as we speak. But I really look forward to hearing your views on the cyber aspect of this war.
Thanks so much, Aadi. It's always great to be on your show, and Jai Hind to all your viewers. And I hope whatever we discuss today is of use to them.
Oh, I'm sure it is. The last two videos have done really well, and we've got very good appreciation for that. So, the first question I'd like to ask you is, the world, as I said, was expecting a crippling cyber attack on the Ukrainians and their systems and their setup and everything like that. This could have just before the kinetic attacks, during the kinetic attacks, or even right now during the current operations which are going on where Russia has got its own objectives. Couple of things that come out is that we probably didn't see it, it didn't get reported, or whatever it may be. My question to you is a little different. Why did the world expect Russia to do what we are trying to say of very hardcore cyber attack? And does Russia actually have the capability today in terms of creating that kind of a crippling effect on another country? What is their cyber operations all about, sir?
Yeah, that's a great question to start with. In fact, I fully agree with you that everybody expected a lot more to happen in the cyberspace domain as far as the Ukraine conflict is concerned, which apparently has not happened to the extent expected. So let's see first, like you were saying, why is it that they were expecting? What is so great about Russia that they were expecting such crippling attacks to take place? Now, before I get into that, let me first clarify as to just to highlight. It's a takeoff from our previous discussions actually, that when we talk of attacks through cyberspace, what exactly are we talking about? So essentially, there are three. This narrative war and what media, whatever we are looking at, assessing through whatever we are hearing through TV and various cyberspace events. How can we classify? What are the different types of things? So first is what we can refer to as offensive cyber operations. Now, what I mean by this word, offensive cyber operations, is those which are meant to let's say, create physical effects, disrupt, destroy either information or actual critical infrastructure. So they are supposed to create physical effects. And if these effects, physical effects, are of a shorter duration, maybe they are just meant to physical effects, but to create cognitive effects. That means to create psychological effects through creating physical effects. So all these types of things I would classify as offensive cyber operations. The second category I would basket of things which I will club things into is what we would refer to as cyber influence operations. Now here there are again two different categories which can be talked about. One is cyber-enabled influence operations. Now, what do I mean by that? Cyber-enabled means you are making use of certain cyber expertise. So, for example, you set up a troll farm. You set up this troll farm, it requires a cyber expertise. And using these troll farms, you then get onto social media and try to develop a narrative. So, basically, it's what we refer to colloquially as propaganda. This propaganda is enabled through cyber expertise. So that is what I'm referring to as cyber-enabled influence operations. And the other type is the ones which are just using cyberspace as a medium. So if you just send simple messages through social media, etc., they would be. This is the second category. So in one, cyber expertise is required, in other, it is not required. All this basket of disciplines I'm referring to as cyber influence operations. And then we can also talk about, in the context of the Ukraine conflict, non-cyber media operations, something which comes through the broadcast media. They are also influence operations. You're disseminating news, you're disseminating your points of views and twisted information, etc., etc. There are a whole lot of stratagems which are used. So these three categories. So the second and third category are actually all under the basket of influence operations. One through cyberspace, other which cyberspace is not really involved. And the first category, the more important category, is offensive cyber operations, where really you're using your cyber expertise to disrupt, destroy, or signal through creating cognitive effects. Now, having clarified that, so let's see why the world was expecting that Russia would, in conjunction with military operations, it would create crippling effects through cyberspace. Why was it expecting that? For that, we have to look at the demonstrated capabilities of Russia. Now, let there be no doubt that the demonstrated capabilities across the world, global players, even if we include China, US, etc., the demonstrated capabilities in cyberspace, whether it is offensive cyber operations or it is cyber influence operations, Russia has by far been the best on the top as far as demonstrated capabilities are concerned. We know that, and we are talking of cyber operations or cyber activities or conflicts which result in strategic effects. So we know that the first such cyber attack, which is always referred to, is the Stuxnet. Now, the Stuxnet, of course, was authored by the US and Israel combined together. That's what it is estimated. That happened. But as far as state level cyber conflicts are concerned, it is really started with Estonia in 2007. That was the Estonian cyber attacks which took place were as a result of, there was a bronze soldier of Tallinn, a statue was relocated by Estonia, which Russia took offense to. And so attacks on Estonia occurred. So this was the first one, which is well known. Then Russia demonstrated its capabilities during the Russo-Georgian War of 2008, where it was the first time that cyber conflicts were used in conjunction with military operations. That was the second. Then in 2015 and 16, it was again Russia. All these, when I say Russia, it's all attributed to Russia because, attributability is a very big issue. I mean, it's not very easy to pinpoint and prove that it actually was that, but this is what it is estimated to be, assessed to be Russia. So in 2015, December was the first time when, through cyberspace, an electrical grid of Ukraine itself was disrupted. In fact, almost 250,000 subscribers were put off grid for about 5 to 6 hours. This was in 2015. So this is the first time critical infrastructure of one state was disrupted by another through cyberspace. Again, 1 year later, there was another electrical grid attack which took place in 2016, again against Ukraine. Here, this particular attack is important because it was specifically, the nature of the malware which was used was tailored to attack specifically electrical grid components. The first one was a generic sort of a malware. I mean, the one which took place in 2015. In 2016, it was specifically tailored for electrical grids, and that's why it was very sophisticated, although the effect itself was not as great as it was felt in 2015. So twice the electrical grids of Ukraine were disrupted. Then you come to 2017. In 2017, you had the NotPetya attack, which initially was targeted towards Ukraine and thereafter it uncontrolled, it spread across the world, including it affected certain organizations in Russia itself and across the world, including the US, etc. And it is estimated that $80 billion worth of recovery action was taken, had to be taken to come for the world to come back, recover from this NotPetya attack. In fact, it is till date considered the greatest destructive cyberspace attack which has taken place in the world. And then in 2019, actually, the initial vectors were there. And finally discovered in December 2020 was the SolarWinds attack. Now, this was actually an espionage type of attack, which was launched, again, attributed to Russia, where through, it is one of those, what they refer to as supply chain attacks, where certain malware was uploaded. I'll not go into the details because of shortage of time, but this was a very sophisticated precision attack, and it continued for 14 months almost. It was not discovered. And thereafter, when it was discovered, then of course remedial actions and all were taken. So it was a very, very sophisticated attack as late as 2020. And in fact, it is felt that effects of SolarWinds will be felt for many years to come. The end effects have not yet been seen. So these are the demonstrated capabilities which Russia gave out over the years, and that is one of the reasons why people were expecting. So, which are these organizations? You also asked as to how Russia is organized. Do they have the capabilities, etc.? One is this demonstrated capabilities, but what are the organizations behind this? Well, we have essentially there are several, but we can talk of four main organizations. One is the Foreign Intelligence Service of Russia. It's SVR is the acronym, but it's actually the Foreign Intelligence Service, which is its charter is to collect intelligence outside the CIS, those set of countries which are the near abroad of Russia. So that is the charter of SVR. Outside of CIS is the charter of SVR, and within the CIS is the charter of the Federal FSB, what is referred to as the Federal Security Service. Now, SVR, you can say it is the equivalent of, you can say the CIA of the US, or our own NTRO or RAW and NTRO, etc. This is the equivalent of that. Now, when I'm saying that Foreign Intelligence Service, essentially the cyber attacks, the vectors which have been launched, they have been given names. The people who carry it out, it's called the APT, or Advanced Persistent Threat 29. So a number of threat actors are clubbed under this APT 29. But essentially, APT 29 is supposedly or assessed to be a part of the Foreign Intelligence Service of Russia. So this is one capability, and they are the ones who are attributed to 2016 US elections, the interference which took place, the SolarWinds attack, but they restrict themselves to covert espionage, which is in line with their chart, which is what I mentioned. So SolarWinds was an espionage attack. Then you have the notorious main intelligence directorate of the armed forces, the GRU. Actually, currently it is known as the GU, but it is still referred to by its previous name, the GRU. Now, the GRU is the intelligence directorate of the armed forces of Russia. And again, the threat actors, several of them, they are known by several names, but collectively known as Advanced Persistent Threat 28. So this is the second one. There are in fact 3 units which are there. I won't go through the numbers, 26165, etc., etc. The 3 units, and they are the ones who are attributed with the NotPetya attack, the devastating NotPetya attack. Also, one of the units is specifically targeted against psychological operations. And of course, all of these organizations together, they all participated in the 2016 the presidential elections of Russia. All of them participated. The FSB is the third, as I said. They are the ones who look internally within the CIS. CIS is actually the Commonwealth of Independent States. It's a set of 11 countries which are there, including Russia. So that's another. And then you have a non-state actor, which is the Internet Research Agency. This is also very well-known Internet Research Agency. It's a private organization funded by the Kremlin oligarch Yevgeny Rizogin, so to say, is also known as the troll farm or the troll factory. So they essentially involve themselves in disinformation and propaganda operations. Essentially, all their focus is on the social media. So these are four agencies which primarily are behind the capabilities of Russia, and they have demonstrated it very well. And that is a longish answer, but that is why the world was expecting that a lot will come out in cyberspace during this conflict, which essentially did not happen.
One of the biggest things, sir, is that you've actually covered, the FSB and the GRU and stuff like that. And these are, of course, names that have been publicized in the movies more than anything else. CIA versus FSB fights and stuff like that. And it was the previous ones, which was CIA versus KGB. But it's an interesting paradigm that they have an organized structure. By what your answer is, that I can actually understand they've got a very organized structure, which is something as a lesson we must learn in India, because we currently, as we've discussed, we are probably in the very nascent state of building up the structure in terms of cyber operations. It's something.
Let me add just one more point here. Sorry for interrupting. Just one more point, which I must mention since you talked of structures, that despite all this activity and their demonstrated capability, the US came up with this cyber command in 2010, and China came up with the strategic support force in 2015, early 15, 16. So Russia, in terms of structures, is still considered to have done lesser than China and US. I mean, in terms of structures, because these are existing organizations which are being tasked with cyber, offensive cyber, and all these information effects. Existing organization, no special organization has been created. But again, I'll repeat that the demonstrated capability of Russia has been the best across the three.
So Ukraine, in your opinion, has been a testing ground. Basically, they've been shooting out anything that comes on their way. In terms of Ukraine, you've told us about
the petri dish of cyberspace operations, so to say. That's what Ukraine is referred to.
And it's interesting, sir, because the Russians have been doing this quite quietly, and creating an impression that of their strength across the world in terms of the cyber capabilities that they carry. You've told us certain attacks that the Russians have carried out in Ukraine over the years. You've taken us through, and you've also told us the major attacks that are going to affect the entire worldwide community with regards the solar flares and so on. What are the kind of attacks that you've seen, carried on to Ukraine during this conflict, and how do you analyze them, sir?
Yeah, sure. So, so far I had given you all across the globe, etc., while couple of them were also related to Ukraine. So let me just quickly highlight, there have been large number of attacks which have taken place over the years against Ukraine per se. I'll just highlight some of them and then come on to the current conflict. So in 2000, it started roughly around 2013 or so. So in 2013, the Ukrainian government, law enforcement, military officials, there were harassment type of attacks which were carried out in 2013. Then in March 2014, Crimea's telecommunication infrastructure was targeted. There were disabling attacks in preparation for the annexation of Crimea. Then in December 2015, I refer to these two, the energy distribution companies, which the two attacks which I talked about, that happened in 2015-16. In 2017, Kiev's metro system and the Odessa airport were targeted using something what is referred to as the Bad Rabbit ransomware to disable and disrupt. And in 2020, again, social disruption social media type of attacks against the Ukrainian citizens per se, through phishing attacks, modification and destruction of data, etc. And this led to violent protests and clashes with the police. This is the type of social disruption which was achieved in February 2020 in certain areas. And in 2021 July, the Naval Forces website also was targeted to express certain discontent on certain exercises which had taken place. So over the years, like I said, some of them I picked up some against critical infrastructure, some against the social media type of attacks. So these are the types of things which have been happening over the years. Now coming on to the current conflict. What has happened in the current Ukraine conflict? Firstly, there have been three DDoS attacks. Now, when we say, DDoS attacks are the simplest in terms of technical expertise. They are the distributed denial of service attacks. Now, what happens is a large number of, pings, or you get onto a particular IP address, etc. And if you keep on pinging it, keep on accessing it, it gets overloaded. That's the colloquial, simple explanation of a DDoS attack, distributed denial of service. So you can't really utilize that, whatever you're attacking, it gets overwhelmed, so to say. So 3 such DDoS attacks took place. The first of them took place on January 14th. Then the next one took place on 15th of February. And the last one was in conjunction with the physical attack just a day before that on February 23rd. So 3 DDoS attacks took place, and large-scale DDoS attacks were there to disrupt, basically target against government sites, banks, financial institutions, and certain other websites, etc., web servers, etc. Then the main technical ones, which were meant to disrupt and sort of destroy or disrupt, have physical effects. The first one was referred to as Whispergate. This was on January 15th. Now, on 15th Jan, Microsoft reported a destructive malware operating against multiple organizations in Ukraine. This was a new malware family used in an ongoing operation targeting multiple industries as well as government, information technology organizations, and such. The malware was designed to destroy the victims, something called the MBR. It's a boot record. It's a technical term used for certain in the hard disk of a system, and corrupt files or attached storage devices. And it obfuscated its identity to evade detection and analysis. It was actually disguised as a ransomware. But ultimately, it was meant to wipe and corrupt a Windows system to the point where files and drives were no longer recoverable. Now, these attacks took place in the context of an escalated risk of Russian invasion. January 15th, people were expecting things to happen. So invasion of Ukraine, and in conjunction with those website attacks, the DDoS attacks which had taken place on January 14th. So this was on January 15th. Next, a similar Viperware. This is referred to as Viper malware or Viperware. Another Viperware called Hermetic Viper. Now this took place just a day before, on the same day as the third set of DDoS attacks on February 23rd. Another sophisticated Viper malware was recorded and reportedly installed on hundreds of machines in the country. It showed a time stamp of 28 December 2021, much earlier, implying that the attack may have been planned since then. Unless, of course, it was, you could always put in a wrong date as part of the malware. So this was 2 malware attacks, one in January and one in February. Then come March, beginning the first week of March, Russia began to significantly increase the frequency of its cyber attacks against Ukrainian civilians. On 9th March alone, one blocking software which was used to block these malwares, it mitigated, as per the logs, 4.6 million attacks against computers and phones in Ukraine and Poland. I mean, that's the statistics I believe for both of them combined, at a rate more than 10 times higher than the European average. So a lot of this malware was trying to contact malicious command and control infrastructure. So this was the intensity increased in March. Another important thing is the targeting of the internet. So there were efforts to disrupt internet also. So with Russia continuing its heavy bombardment across Ukraine, parts of the country have seen severe internet outages. Telecoms such as one is called Triolan. It serves a substantial number of users across the country. That was targeted. The first attack was on 24th February in conjunction with the physical attacks, and the second on March 9th. Also, the European Viasat satellite, which also serves Ukraine, was also reportedly attacked through cyberspace. I mean, this is just an assessment. And it disabled thousands of German wind turbines which are working off this Viasat. So these are the types of attacks which are, there may have been many others, but these are the types of attacks which have been highlighted, happened in conjunction with the current Ukraine conflict. And to summarize these, the types of targets have been critical infrastructure, military systems, harassment of the civilian population, and disinformation. The last two, to lower the morale of the citizenry of Ukraine and to sort of create these information effects so that the military operations are facilitated. So this is what has been happening so far as far as the Ukraine conflict is concerned.
I mean, some of the attacks that you've said have been covered in the mainstream media, but many that you've said have not been covered at all, and one can only imagine the kind of effect that would have taken place in Ukraine with regards to its perception of security, especially in the cyberspace. Having said that, sir, again coming back to the point that the Russians have a perception of being a very, very strong cyber aggressor, if I may use that phrase, and it's probably not the right way of do it, but I hope I'm conveying the message across. But the world has also seen, in the kinetic aspect, the world has seen the Ukrainians giving a very, very very, very hard resistance to the Russians, and that's something which is pretty commendable. In terms of the cyber game as well, because one thing that we can see that the Ukrainian systems of whatever sort are still up, that means they've not been able to, the Russians have not been able to push it down, which tells you there is a certain kind of resistance. How would you categorize that resistance, and how were they able to actually build up such a capability?
Yeah, this is in fact I consider one of the most interesting aspects of what has been happening in this Ukraine conflict as far as cyberspace is concerned. Why I say interesting is, you see, this is the first time. I mean, if one couldn't imagine this scenario happening, let us say, in any earlier conflict, let's say 5 to 7 years earlier or 10 years earlier, one couldn't imagine such a thing happening. Now, what has happened? The entire world has come together. You can say, when you say the entire world, I'm meaning the Europeans and the US, the NATO countries, and so many others. They've come together in cyberspace. Now, you know very well the geopolitical political situation. The NATO bloc, etc., cannot really get involved in physical fights, but there is nobody stopping them to get into cyber fights. The very first, what the world is used to is sanctions, etc., to be taken. Everybody expected sanctions and all to happen because this is the norm which has been happening. Whenever you're not happy, you can't do anything else. Okay, you go ahead and carry out and impose sanctions. Sanctions are not very effective. Cyberspace is the other area where if you take actions, still the rules and international rule-based order is not so well established. And you can, and attributability and all those things are there, characteristic cyberspace. So one can support, everybody can come to the support and lend their efforts in support of anybody else, so to say, without sort of inviting a reaction or without escalating, so to say, without going up the escalatory ladder. Let me put it that way. So what has happened? The very first, I mean, when attacks started on 24th of February, just 2 days later, on 26th of February, the Deputy Prime Minister, who's also the Minister for Digital Transformation, he's Mykola Fedorov. So he gave a call, open call on Telegram on 26th of February, calling, he said that we are coming up with an IT army. And this IT army, he says, all the hacking community, which we are part of, because Ukraine itself doesn't have any, organized offensive cyber capabilities per se. So it called upon all its internal hacking expertise, whatever was available, IT expertise, including white hat, black hat hackers, all IT expertise within its own country, as also it gave a call across the world to join up with its IT army. And it called upon cyber specialists, it called upon designers, copywriters, marketeers. You would wonder, why would marketeers be called upon to join an IT army? Because it's all part of information warfare. So for information warfare, all these types of people, people with such expertise is required to package the product so that it is, sellable in cyberspace. So it called upon all this, and it published a target list on Telegram. So a target list, it consists of a large number of targets. The type of targets, I'll say, the Russian Ministry of Defense, Kremlin, Roskomnadzor, that is the regulator, the Russian regulator as far as telecommunications and cyber aspects and all are concerned, news websites, Belarus, and there are 12 areas which it, sort of indicated in general as this is the type of things we want you to do. So it wanted this cyber army or IT army to carry out DDoS attacks, to protect its own critical infrastructure. So this is one of the main things which it wanted to carry out OSINT or open source intelligence, so to say. So cyber espionage, social engineering, all the types of things you've been talking about, the different type initially when I covered. So it wanted the cyber army. So this was the broad. So it specified the targets and it gave the types of attacks which are to be carried out against these targets and said anybody and everybody can join in this. That's the call given on Telegram. So imagine, you wouldn't imagine such a thing happening even few years before. But this is what cyberspace and cyber conflicts have graduated to such an extent. Now you wouldn't sort of believe that the strength of the cyber army, till a few days back, I mean, in the first few days, it immediately caught up volunteers more than 1 lakh. Then it crossed 3 lakhs till a few days back. And now I believe it's crossed 4 lakh volunteers. So when you say 4 lakh volunteers, really speaking, you're not looking at those hi-fi, those the ones which deal with 0-day attacks, etc. It's not that type of a quality. But anybody and everybody who can, contribute in some manner, they are part of this volunteers. And there are problems also with this approach. So, for example, how do you coordinate the attacks? And then there's question of infiltration. You could have Russians also coming in, or Russian those who are who have sympathies with Russia would also join in and sort of disrupt activities, so to say. You could have misfires and spillovers. So, for example, NotPetya was an attack I initially mentioned, which was targeted against Ukraine, but ultimately inadvertently spread across the world. So you could have such spillovers. So these are all, disadvantages or drawbacks of going in for such a sort of a loose sort of an approach where everybody is called in to go in for attacks. And escalation is also an issue. So, but then it came up. Then groups like Anonymous, everybody has heard of the Anonymous hacker group. They announced, they said we've declared war on Russia. That was on March 01st. And in fact, they achieved this Roskomnadzor, the regulatory agency of Russia, it's a very important agency. They managed to steal 800 GB of data from Roskomnadzor and released it through something called Ddos Secrets. That's another legal sites. Also, they attacked Kremlin and 300 media sites, including Russia 24 and Moscow 24. Their sites were attacked. The Moscow Stock Exchange, the Space Institute, all these were claimed to be successful attacks by anonymous, they claim, that against these organizations. Then, of course, one comes to Elon Musk. This is also related to cyberspace. So, on 26th Feb, the same Fedorov, the deputy prime minister, and he sent in a tweet which says, the tweet reads something like this: while you try to colonize Mars, Russia tried to occupy Ukraine. While your rockets successfully land from space, Russian rockets attack Ukrainian civil people. We ask you to provide Ukraine with Starlink stations and to address sane Russians to stand, or same Russians to stand. Now, this was the tweet he put out. And this was on 26th Feb. On March 1st, a lorry full of Starlink dishes arrived. This was the quick reaction of Elon Musk. Now, what are these terminals about? So it was feared that internet, etc., will get disrupted completely, although there were a lot of disruptions, but still it is largely working. These dishes, because satellites, you can't really disrupt satellites that way. So if whoever had these terminals, at least important nodes could get through the Starlink, 2000 Starlink satellites, which are there in the low Earth orbit of Elon Musk Starlink constellation. So this was Elon Musk's reaction. Now imagine Dmitry Rogozin, the head of the space agency Roscosmos of Russia, stated that Musk has taken sides. So these are high-level reactions which are taking place. However, it is also interesting to note that Elon Musk refused to block Russian TV because he said, while I'm providing communication support, but he says, I am a free speech absolutist, and so I will not block Russian TV. So he is going by his own set of principles. Then, for example, Microsoft, it has suspended its service and it has committed its support to provide cyber security to Ukraine. Now, these are all people who are getting together to help Ukraine fight the Russian onslaught, so to say. Then there is another interesting thing which needs to be mentioned in this connection. There is a domain name service provider called Namecheap. Now, this domain name service provider, they are the ones who, provide you web services, etc. Many of your website services and all run through these domain name services and related services which are provided. So it said that we are stopping all services to Russian, including Russian citizens and small businesses, etc. We are stopping services, and it gave them a certain amount of time. He says you switch over to any other service you want to, but we cannot support because this is against our principles or whatever distorted logic they had. So this has actually angered even ordinary Russians, because some of the ordinary Russians also who were running small businesses, they were affected by this. So, and this has been questioned by many of the Western experts also, that this is not the way to go, because there's a commitment. When you say we'll provide website services, there's a certain amount of commitment. So these are the types of actions which have happened. There's also been cryptocurrencies. On the aspects of cryptocurrencies, the individuals and agencies which have been sanctioned, Coinbase and Binance, among some other cryptocurrencies, they said, okay, we will freeze the crypto wallets of these sanctioned individuals. Though when they were asked to freeze, to block wallets of all Russians, Fedorov gave this call also. The same minister Fedorov gave a call to block wallets of ordinary citizens. These cryptocurrency exchanges, as they are called, they refused to block, just like Elon Musk refused to block normal Russian TV, etc. So these were the ones who came in support of Ukraine. There was also a certain amount of reaction from the other side. So, for example, there is, just like Anonymous came in support of Ukraine, there is a Conti hacktivist group. just like Anonymous, there's a well-known Conti group which is there. It has been, attributed or to have carried out several high-profile cyber attacks across the globe, so to say, the Conti group. So it came out in support of Russia, although it is not really a Russian group. It has got global connections, but it came out in support of Russia on 25th of February. Initially, it said Russian government. Then it said that since citizens of Russia are affected, it is coming out in support of Russia and essentially attacking the critical information infrastructure and corporate structures of Ukraine. So this was one of the hacktivist groups which came out in support of Russia. And then, of course, the National Coordination Center for Computer Incidents, this is an official organization in Russia. It gave directions it gave a call on its own to similar groups, other groups, I mean, non-state groups, to attack some 17,000 IP addresses it identified, which included the CIA and FBI, etc. It said you counterattack them. So just like Fedorov had given a call there, the NCCACI gave a similar call to those who were in sympathy with Russia to carry out such updates. And it told its citizens, interesting, it told its citizens not to go in for updates of things like Windows systems and all. It feared that through these updates, Microsoft, etc., might, send in some targeting attacks, although this is not really expected. But you look at the types of things which are happening, that updates which are supposed to protect your systems and the interdependability of states with one another. This is another aspect which is how the world has become interdependent. So Russia uses YouTube. It would be interesting to note that YouTube is the highest usage, let's say, social media sort of a platform which is used in Russia. It's at the top, YouTube, right? So NCCI said, don't carry out updates. And it also gave directions to switch over from foreign DNSs which are manned by foreign service providers, to Russian DNSs. It gave these directions also to all the Russians, including businesses and individuals, etc. And I'll draw a connection to this direction of it towards the end of our talk. There's a very interesting aspect which comes out of it. So these are the types of actions and counteractions which have taken place as a result of the Russian attacks.
So the big attacks, of course, have their own crippling effect, but they are not really understood by the common janta, if I may, say it. And people who are observing the war, they observe more kinetic aspects of it. Their intents and their focus is towards the videos that are coming out from there. Coming to that aspect, one strong aspect we can see, one strong segment of the cyber operations from Ukraine, we can see is a build-up of a narrative. We can see that it is being used to kind of sideline the Russian narrative quite strongly, because you also realize that YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram have actually pulled off from Russia, leaving Russia void of the opportunity of actually putting out their own narrative. So that's a part one of what I want to say. And the second part, day before yesterday, we had this video of President Zelensky, which is being called a deep fake, of him asking his soldiers to surrender. There was another counter video that came out of Vladimir Putin as well, as a matter of fact, saying that Russia is capitulating in this particular war. In a scenario where the world is looking at the leaders, such a video of any kind coming out from them could be devastating for its own side. How do you look at this whole narrative war being played out in the cyberspace, sir?
Yeah. So that's what initially I referred to, and you so rightly brought out that the narrative war, the influence operations. This is the second aspect of this entire cyberspace related activities which occurs. And I fully agree with you that Russia is on the receiving end or the losing side of this war. It has really not much to do with capabilities, because the manner in which this whole thing is unfolding on the world stage, the entire European Union, NATO countries, and US, etc., and the world per se, even the neutral countries are more or less, the types of voting which have occurred in the General Assembly, Security Council, and General Assembly, etc. Large number of countries are on the side because nobody really wants wars in that way. And so the sentiments are that way, including, let's say, our own media outlets, as you know. So it is, Russia is losing this sort of a battle. There's no doubt. And in fact, it's been painted, Putin has been painted as a war criminal, etc. So there are many sides to it. We'll not go into the politics part of it. I just want to highlight some of the aspects related to these media wars. And of course, the second question, query, point which you have raised. So in general, as you see, exploiting of today's technology and cyber connectivity and media power which is there by Zelensky himself. I was listening to one of the panel presentations, and a high-placed US personnel was referring to Zelensky as Churchill on steroids. Winston Churchill is this thing. So now he's managed to address the parliaments of European Union, Canada, Germany, and US. And all this has been enabled by what? It has been enabled by cyberspace ultimately. So the complete Western world, as I said, has painted Putin as a war criminal. And so India, of course, is maintaining its neutral stance. But our media, because of natural humanitarian reasons, etc., anybody who sees missiles falling and civil infrastructure, obviously that's a type of story which automatically builds up, and of course it is very well justified too. Coming to broadcast media,
sorry to interrupt you, but it's better TRPs as well showing.
That's right. Now coming to media wars per se. So what has been happening? Some of the highlights. The European Union on 27th February, the president of the European Union, Ursula von der Leyen, tweeted that the state-owned Russia Today and Sputnik and their subsidiaries will no longer be able to spread lies to justify Putin's war. This was a tweet, and these two were banned across the European Union states, right? BBC. On March 16th, the same regulatory agency, Roskomnadzor, blocked BBC and other news sites for undermining Russian stability and security, leading the British outlet to broadcast over shortwave radio. So this was a reaction on BBC by Russia. As far as social media is concerned, on 28th Feb, Meta, the parent company of Facebook, blocked Russian state media outlets, Russia Today and Sputnik, across the EU. This was actually in conjunction with the other blocking of the broadcast media by same call by Russian EU president. It was in line with that. So Meta in the European Union blocked on the social media platforms Russia Today and Sputnik. You would notice, at least I have noticed, that in India, Tata Sky is also not getting Russia Today. I was listening to the Russia Today channel on Tata Sky, and I believe in Airtel also it is not there. So two of the channels, the only message which comes through is there's a technical problem. So really speaking, why Tata Sky is not broadcasting it, I don't think it is essential. There's some back-end problem which is coming up, engineered by someone or the other, as far as Russia Today is concerned. It's not available in the open domain, why it is happening. Now, on the social media, what about retaliation by Russia? Roskomnadzor partially blocked Facebook for allegedly restricting the accounts of state-owned media, then blocked Twitter also. So this is what happened in Russia. and it demanded that Wikipedia remove supposedly false reports of casualties amongst Russian military troops as well as Ukrainian civilians, including children. It asked Wikipedia to remove. I don't know whether they were removed or not, but it has not really blocked it. So there are, moves and counter moves happening on the social media platforms also, and on the broadcast media front also. So this is what I wanted to bring out. Also, you must have, it was widely reported in the news. On March 4th, Russian president has signed a new law punishing fake news with up to 15 years in prison. The rule proposes to impose fines or jail terms for spreading false information about the military, and fines for people who publicly call for sanctions against Russia. And courts would mete out harsher sentences. So this is a new law which has come up in Russia to whatever is happening. So these are the types of activities which have been happening on the media front. And as far as narrative warfare and all is concerned, we see every day on the news the types of narratives which are being played out. And coming to the second aspect, a very interesting thing which is happening now is this deepfakes, so to say. The two videos, one of Zelensky and the other one was of, I think, Putin, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, one was of Zelensky and one other was Putin. Zelensky is saying drop down oils, and Putin also saying something that we have stopped war, etc., etc. Now, let me tell you that if you compare the expertise required to create these deep fakes is much less today with artificial intelligence tools which have come up. It is much easier to create these deep fakes as compared to, for example, the cyber attacks, the difficult type of cyber attacks, which I was talking like Whispergate and all these other, not Petya, they require much higher level of expertise and talent development than to create these deepfakes. I mean, today, even you and me would be, if we just get to those tools in hand, we would be able to create these deepfakes ourselves. So it's not that great a shakes. So this all gives relevance to the fact that as far as information per se is concerned, one has to really go into nuances of who's saying what to say to ourselves, filter out everybody's own is what is right and what is wrong is extremely difficult to make out. And it's only when the dust settles we'll come to know the real story.
That's the problem, sir. They're not letting the dust settle. And it's going to be probably a little while before we come to know the whole reality. And that's one of the problems in actually doing an analysis. And as you and I were talking offline, that we don't want to put out any conjecture. I personally don't in my channel, because at the end of it, I've tried to keep it as a credible thing. And you have your own, obviously, purposes in not putting out any conjecture which could be probably termed as not correct. That is perfectly understandable, sir. So my final question is, Russia had all the time to practice, if I may say so, against Ukraine. They've been practicing their cyber capabilities for a long time. We've not seen, I come back to the first question, we didn't see them getting crippled in terms of their capabilities and stuff like that. Now, as a layman, I look at it in two aspects. One, either Russia did not do it in their full Josh, if I may use the word, or two, the West was able to actually cover up Ukraine pretty properly and make sure that their assets were, kept together. Because this is one space, as we've discussed in our last video, there is no kind of red line for war that has been created. So the West could have actually taken a chance. Now, I'd like to kind of, have your viewpoint as somebody who watches the cyberspace and the military use of cyberspace as to what exactly is the reason. Has Russia not used its capability, or has Ukraine been able to protect itself really well?
Yeah, sure. So you actually, I wanted to give a disclaimer before this talk itself, because all that I have stated, it's all based on what is available in the open domain, and I've tried to tap credible sources, and many things have been happening over the years, so to say. So those are more or less established. Some
Absolutely.
things which are happening in the current conflict has to be seen in the context in which the open domain is reporting it. So it has to be taken in that, and that's why I did not delve into narrative wars and this and that, because one can't really say what really is happening there.
Absolutely.
Now coming to this very important aspect of, and one can always try and analyze. So I've myself given it a thought, and of course I've listened to experts giving their opinions on why this crippling attacks have not occurred. So 4 or 5 different reasons come out. The very first one is what we are talking of, this fog of cyber war. Fog of cyber war. Well, we really do not know whether what are the crippling attacks which did occur or did not occur. We'll come to know the real details only subsequently. Some things have emerged, but like we do not know the exact nature of destruction and how many civilian casualties, etc., is all lost in the fog of war. Similarly, in this fog of cyber war also, the full picture is not ahead of us. So you never know. Some effective attacks may have taken place. Some of them I've already told you, but more may have taken place. But having stated that, there are other reasons why it is felt that possibly the full unfolding of their capabilities. Uh, I made a statement in my initial outset itself that one should not doubt the capabilities of Russia. That is not in doubt because it's already been demonstrated, and very well demonstrated over the years, that it has got the capability. Why it has not unfolded it is what we are trying to analyze. So one is that this is my own thinking, that the cyber capabilities are more effective in a gray zone scenario where full-fledged conflict has not yet unfolded. There, the effectiveness of cyber operations is much more. The moment physical conflict starts, so like one of the experts put it in one of the panel discussions, that when missile is landing, what physical effects can you create through cyber as compared to the effect of a missile landing on a particular site? So it has. If the objective is to make the other side put down its arms, which is one of the objectives of the current conflict, then through cyberspace, through cyber effects, such a thing is not what cyber effects are meant for. But there are other types of things which could have been done. For example, the critical, like for example, the electrical grids were disrupted in 2015. Effectively, they were upgraded. They were targeted. They were brought down also. Although the effect lasted only for a few hours, but that was in 2015-16. Now we're in 2021-22. They could have accumulated and got their APTs, the advanced persistent threats, in place in the respective places. I think we can take it for granted that they would have had their malwares in place, but they purposely did not activate them. I'm talking of, for example, the electrical grids first, right? They did not activate because if they have to, I said that some of it is signaling. So if you create an effect which is meant to be signaling, which can be retrieved, it's a temporary sort of an effect. So temporary effect in conjunction with full-fledged military operations doesn't have much meaning. But if one has to create permanent effect, if one has to completely disrupt, some servers, etc., from which recovery is not possible. So suppose for electrical grids, Russia had done it now. This aim was what? Its aim was, if it is to take control of, let us say, if that is an objective, which a lot of people doubt, that's probably not an objective, but whatever areas it wants to control, it would not like to disrupt something which otherwise it has to manage subsequently. So it wants makes you make use of the infrastructure subsequently for its own purposes. And the same logic applies to the internet, the communication grids. So it possibly wants to make use, just like there was a mention that the Ukrainians want to make use or are trying to make use of the Russian communication infrastructure, the borders to get through on the internet where it is disrupted. In a similar manner, if the Russian forces, military forces, are moving into Ukraine, it would like to make use of this communication infrastructure. So because of this reason, possibly it has not disrupted this. to the extent it could have, right? Then one comes to the fact that the most disruptive attacks, the most powerful attacks which are there in cyber malware, something which are referred to as the zero-day attacks, etc., which can really disrupt systems. DDoS, etc., are the low-level type of things you can carry out anytime, and then you walk back from it, it comes back to normal. But the zero-day, which can actually destroy the end equipment, they are really one-shot activities. If you make use of it, the adversary knows that, okay, this is a vulnerability and the vulnerability will be plugged. So these are referred to as one-shot activities to be used when it is actually necessary, right? So probably the way in which the operations are unfolding, Russia has not felt the need to lose these one-shot weapons which they have in their arsenal at this point in time. And probably, let us say, the conflict escalates much more. So, for example, in the physical space, you saw initially it went about slowly, but now it has escalated its physical attacks on various, and the destruction is actually escalating. In a similar manner, in the cyber domain also, at a point in time, it might come up. You never know. So this is another reason. And the last reason which needs to be highlighted is that any of these attacks, I talked about the spillover effects of NotPetya, which was targeting only Ukraine, but thereafter spread globally. So it is very difficult to control the effects of the more disruptive malware which takes place. So if it spills over, it goes out of control, then it will spill over to other NATO countries, which might make the whole conflict go up the escalation ladder, so to say. So there are various reasons which have been analyzed. It could be one or a combination of them, which are the reasons for. So far, we have not seen crippling attacks, as we say. There have been attacks, we've seen effects, but they've not been as crippling as estimated. Right? There's another very important point which I just wanted to highlight, just to wrap up our current discussion, is that all these media wars and all these disruptions taking place, Microsoft leaving, YouTube not listening to the regulatory agency. Regulatory agency is trying to say you take off all these videos. It is not doing that, but it is carrying on its own narratives on YouTube, etc. Similarly, Telegram. I think it's Telegram only. Yeah, Telegram. Russia has tried its best to have control over the messages passing through Telegram. It's got its own encryption mechanisms and all, just like WhatsApp. So Telegram has also got. Russia has tried its best to control, but it has not been able to control. So since it is getting isolated to its disadvantage, I mean, isolated in the sense that things which are to its disadvantages are what is functioning, and what it wants to do, it is unable to do because of the whole block coming against it. One of the options which Russia has in front of it is to completely disconnect itself from the global internet. It is one of the options which is being assessed that Russia might adopt to shield itself against this one-sided aspect which is happening, right? And it actually carried out an exercise 2 years back in 2019-20. It carried out this exercise, something what is referred to as the RUNet. RU standing for Russia, the .ru domain. So it carried out this exercise. It was to a large extent successful. And I mentioned earlier on in the talk that it had asked its own Russians to switch over its DNS points of contact to its own DNS servers. This may be a step towards deciding at a point in time to disconnect Russia altogether from cyberspace. This is a fragmentation of cyberspace, which in our earlier talk also, when we talked of cyber sovereignty, etc., you remember we had mentioned fragmentation of cyberspace, how to protect yourself. Russia may be moving in that direction. Now, let's see how it unfolds as it goes ahead. So this is one of the things which has been assessed, which I wanted to mention.
I don't think a lot of people would actually think that would be possible, but You never know the Russians. They're unpredictable. And by the way that this whole thing has been played out, one thing that you can also see, Russia could not penetrate the mainstream media as well as the social media initially. But now the true narrative of the Russian war is slow and steady, starting to trickle in, where people are starting to ask questions of the Ukrainians themselves. Listen, these are the facts that we came to know. What did you do? So previously it was, oh, poor Ukraine, poor Zelensky, poor this, poor that. And it wasn't a very deep-rooted narrative that was created. I think there is a bit of a change. And I think over the next few days, you'll be able to see a little bit of a change in terms of the Russian narrative coming out, because the Russians are going to fight back. And that's something that you also put across very clearly. They've got the capability to do it. They've been sidelined by a lot of things, but something I personally, as my opinion, would be coming out. So you brought out some very important points as to why the Russians have not used it, because this is a big question that is being asked. And I think it is the similar answer with regards why the Russians gone ahead with about 50 days of bombing before the actual ground invasion, as the Americans did it in Iraq, or in Kosovo for that matter, 87 days of bombing, destroying everything and then going inside. I think the Russians have larger motives of making sure that the area is favorable to them, the people are favorable to them. So keeping some sort of a structure alive in that entire area, not destroying it altogether. And that makes quite a lot of sense because that's the kind of tactic they're also following in the kinetic aspect of it. Today, they've escalated it to a large extent. But as a senior army person, I'm sure you'll agree with me that this normal escalation happens during a negotiation of a peace deal, so that there's a certain amount of pressure that can be put across. But this has been an interesting discussion. So you've brought out some very interesting aspects about cyber warfare and how it has been moved and molded to actually bring about the world against Russia today. And it's an interesting paradigm that I think our Chinese friends would be looking at very carefully, because in such a case and scenario that they do look at Taiwan, they probably are getting a taste of what the West would kind of do to their own perspective or their own perception amongst the world. Thank you so much, sir, for this lovely preparation. And as always, it's a pleasure talking to you about modern warfare and its various different aspects. Till next time, sir. Jai Hind.
Thank you very much, Aadi. It's been a pleasure as always. Thank you.